in the EU treaty, we have this principle of subsidiarity. But what is for me as priest very important is that this is not a Catholic principle of subsidiarity, because in the church teaching, subsidiarity starts from a single person, so from the ground, from the lowest level, and then there's the transmission of competences to the higher levels. In the EU treaty, you start only with the state, member states, and the EU institutions. So what is the most important in the principle of subsidiarity is totally absent. So it's difficult to call this principle of subsidiarity, but even this understanding of subsidiarity is provoking a question if it is really respected. Then when we have the Treaty of Rome and this rule that the nations should build always closer cooperation. In this moment, it's important that to stress that in this article of the treaty is mentioned cooperation between nations. It means that the EU has also task to take care for the nations, so to preserve their identities and their existence. There is, in the second paper, I think there was an issue concerning the relationship between the EU values and the European values. So when we talk about human life, protection of human life, marriage, family, Christianity, these are European values. But unfortunately, they are no more the EU values. And so if we have the proposals to grant all over Europe the so-called right to abort, or the same-sex couples, the recognition of same-sex couples, adoption, and so on. I think that maybe these are the EU values, but these are not European values. So there is a question concerning relationship between the EU and the whole tradition of Europe. In this sense also, that we could observe, and we can observe now also, a kind of hostility of the EU institutions against Christianity. I think that the most symbolic example were the disputes over the preambles and the reference to Christianity in the treaties. But recently we had, already for the second time, an attempt to cancel Christmas in Europe. Cancel all the Christian feasts for Europe. I know this problem from the time when I work in Brussels, because there was the famous case of the European agenda for schools, where the Christianity was cancelled. And now there is a kind of repetition, but this means only that this culture is still developing in the EU Commission. In this context, there is also the question concerning migration policy. On the one hand, to what extent this should be preserved as a national competence. On the other hand, we have to be conscious that in the recent years, the structure, religious structure of migration population is changing also, demographic religious structure of Europe. So we see the diminishing percentage of Christians in Europe and the growing percentage of Muslims. I think that this issue should be also considered when the decision on migration policy are taken by or by the member states or by the EU institutions. On the other hand, the EU is in a certain sense taking power over churches. Here, just one example, the General Regulation on Data Protection. So this regulation is granting the possibility for the churches to preserve freedom, to preserve independence, but only if the churches will implement the EU standard into the canon law. So the EU is deciding the form of the canon law this way. Then concerning Germany, Robert Schuman said, and this was much time before the reunification of Germany, that Germany is too big to Europe. So that the whole construction of European integration was to, in a certain sense, domesticate Germany. And it's clear that you cannot, you have to accept the size of Germany in Europe. So the question is how it might be avoided that will happen what Ulrich Beck called a German empire by accident. So this is, in my understanding, possible only by a kind of self-limitation by German politicians, so that they will avoid this possible domination in the EU policy, in the EU institutions, and so on. Then the last issue concerning the security of nations. It happened when Denmark joined the EU that at that time in Denmark there was a big fear of Germanization of Denmark, so that the state, Danish state, will be preserved, being a member state, and the whole process of integration is, in a certain sense, strengthening the position of the member states. But at the same time, the Danish nation can disappear. And Ole Weaver, with the Copenhagen School, they elaborated the whole theory of ontological security, saying that it's very important to recognize in the process of integration the issue of security of the nations, that they should be introduced some elements granting that the national identities of national communities will be preserved, that they will not be a kind of melting pot in Europe. And if not, Weaver is saying, if not, Europe will face big conflicts in the future, which will disintegrate the EU. So here, I think that's a very important issue, because this diversity of nations on the very small continent is also a part of European identity. So if those nations would disappear, we can say also there will be no more Europe in this sense. They will be a kind of post-Europe continent, of post-European union. But that's very interesting in my understanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mazurkiewicz, for that insight. And now I would like to invite Mr. Richard Schütze for your speech from Berliner Academy für Medienrhetorik and Kommunikation, and about, the role of the European community at creating the condition for the cooperation and equal development of the enterprises in all member states. What should be done to reach this goal? And just before you start, you know, you can, of course, adjust your speech, Mr. Reichert. You don't need to follow exactly, you know, my recommendations. So feel you're free, you know, and flexible to speak what you want. But before you start, I just would like to mention what currently Pope Francis said, that dictatorship. So she, in a reaction to the cancelling of the Christmas, this very, let's say, excuse me for the word, the stupid idea of some guys in the European Parliament or European Commission, you know, to cancel the Christmas. So the reaction of the Pope Francis was, remember, there were many dictatorships. There was Stalin, there was Hitler, there was Mussolini, there was Napoleon, right? And they lost. They finally bankrupt. So if you try to, you know, go against this tradition, you will bankrupt as well. So Mr. Richard Schütze, go ahead. The floor is yours, please.
Yes. Thanks a lot. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah.
Thanks. First, a short remark. I'm a lawyer and also consultant in media affairs, crisis management, and so on. And I'm the president of the Catholic Entrepreneur Association here in the Diocese, Catholic Diocese of Berlin, called Bund Katholischer Unternehmer, Association of Catholic Entrepreneurs. Most of my time I spent being the founder and management director of Academy for Values, Leadership and Responsibility, called Valere Academy. Based in Berlin, we work in the important cities of Germany. We organize seminars and workshops for educating people, but we are also a platform discussing the roots of our European values and the meanings of all the leadings and famous philosophers worldwide about that, what the sense of human being, state building, and also institutions like family, social market economy, private property, etc. is, and what this means for developing this society in Germany and, of course, also in Europe. We are the Valere Academy in contact with international partners in Austria, etc. And so this is also the connection to what I will say in a few moments. But I beg your pardon that I have to leave this forum within the next hour, because I have to make a speech about the sense of freedom in the Academy tonight. I beg your pardon. But now, our theme today, the role of the European community and also the European Commission by creating the conditions for the cooperation and equal development of the enterprises in all the member states is important, I think, and has passed some theses in 8 bullets. First, the European countries has common Christian roots and a history of enlightenment. We developed nearly the same ideas of law. We trust in the rule of justice and the reign of law. But the European institutions, like the Commission, doesn't have a coherent strategy for global economy and other important themes like an European army or refugee issues, tragedy, and so on. Second, we are convinced of the nature of social market economy and the success of the way of cooperation in a common market. We do need respect for private property in whole Europe and also fair chances for the middle-sized companies in our countries. A lot of them are also family-owned and managed companies. Third, but some of the leading industrial representatives in Germany and also some owners of middle-sized companies in our country wish more protection by the institutions of the European Union against, for example, imperialistic aggression from China. They demand more patent protection, more respect for intellectual property. For this reason, they wish to develop and create a federal state of Europe like the United States of America. They argue that our former Chancellor Helmut Kohl and his French partners like François Mitterrand, etc., had the same intention. I'm not this opinion, but it exists here, and in our country it is a discussion about that. From my point of view, number 4, bullet 4, the European Union is grown too fast. We need, I think, more time to discuss what it means when 28 or 27 countries with different cultures, social, tax, and financial systems come together. And not in every country is a culture of middle-sized companies acting free, like it is, for example, in Germany. Number 5, a project like the Great Green Deal of the President of the European Committee, Dr. Ursula von der Leyen, carries enormous financial and other risks and can overwhelm the community. Europe does need a new feudalistic system of economy where the state is dictating the rules, how to create new products and to find markets and which are the prices for that and so on. We have a lot of different taxes about everything in the European Union, and for a lot of companies is this a big danger to survive. Number 6. On the other hand, most of our middle-sized companies suffer from a lot of detailed regulations. Big companies can cope with this. They have enough budget to set up own departments for processing subsidy applications to get money, for example, from the European Union for the transformation in the energy sector, in the mobility sector, and so on. My point 7 is the European Bank is preparing the way to the debt union. And their policy is also preparing the dispossession of citizens in most of the European countries through inflation. This is a big danger, and I think within the next year it will happen over Europe, including the costs of the pandemic. Number 8 is my conclusion. We need more time to discuss the future of the community. We do not agree with a lot of directions from the European Commissions. We demand more respect for the different cultures of the nations in Europe and their different history and their different historical situation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Richard Schütze, for that very, clear, analytical, putting a statements about this main, I think, important issues related to the basically kind of a mainframe of this economic model in Europe, especially as you highlighted in all countries, the small and medium enterprises, they are the engine of the economy. And if they are under the pressure, suppressed, they are not able, to perform their duties. As we notice in the European Union, there is basically a promotion of the, priorities of the corporations, the so-called the alliances of the big players with the big capitals, and this is something which is a killing, basically a very well-shaped economy is killing not only nationally but from the perspective of the international cooperation. So could you just add a few sentences about that part of that, how this corporations promotions is wrong for the economy, for instance, from the perspective of the Germany?
Yeah, I think the big danger is if we only protect big companies and organize the taking over from different financial institutions, international ones, also Americans, perhaps tomorrow Chinese organizations, then you have the big danger that at the end of the day, state institutions take over these companies. And then you have a new feudal system, like in the Middle Age in our history. Then will come together the political leaders with the industrial leaders. And this is the danger. If you mix these two sectors, then the private property, also of course the middle-sized and family companies are in a big danger. They can't grow up. It will be a debacle for them. For that reason, it is strongly necessary that we, in the different countries of the European Union, defend this structure of middle-sized companies, family companies, and their owners also, because these top managers, which we see on the high level in the global market, they are only a little bit, I do compare them very often with football players. They change the clubs, you know. They are not with their soul in combination with what they are doing. They can also work today for this company and tomorrow for that company. And the combination of responsibility, risk, and the possibility to decide important things, this must come together. Then a company has a real foundation, of course, being led by an entrepreneur, not only by a manager who can be also tomorrow a minister or somebody else. Doesn't make any difference for him.
Yeah, this is very interesting. You know, I mean, a consideration you put, and I fully agree with that. And what we have a lack in the international cooperation between countries in the area of small and medium enterprises, because we are basically, under this pressure of corporation, the priorities, the different tax releases which are related to the corporations. So we are not sometimes speak about the freedom. The corporations, they have tax releases, they have in the transfer prices different kind of manipulations, right? So where is the freedom? Where is the, basically a frame of the, a kind of a reasonable economy model where, you know, the small and medium enterprises can develop very well. So this is a very big area. We need to, basically developed. Otherwise, you know, these differences we notice, differences between, for sharing the benefits. So we notice that more and more benefits, profits are just taken by this few big guys, you know, not only in Europe, but around the globe. And if we will not touch reasonable, in the appropriate way, this issue and attack this issue, in my opinion, as an economist, the European economy will go bankrupt. So, corresponding to that, Mr. Schütze, you said, I would like to invite Professor Grosse, who is, in my feeling, is going to extend this discussion. Professor Grosse is author with myself of a currently elaborated report about the asymmetry of benefits in the European Union. Asymmetry of benefits, the benefits which are taken by different countries. Especially we notice that very low benefits are obtained by the East Middle European countries, And this is as well something which is a very big danger for efficient European or European Union economy. So, Professor Grosse, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much for having me on. I would like to broaden my scope of presentation. But of course, at the first place, I would like to bring about some preliminary remarks related to this main topic of my speech. First of all, what is important to underline that we have a liberal logic of European Common Market, which has tremendous consequences for distribution of income across the continent. The liberal logic of common market is highly advantageous to more competitive regions and states, as well as for bigger, more competitive enterprises coming from the richest parts of the EU. At the same time, weaker economically, weaker parts of the common market are to some extent disadvantages because they have not so competitive economy and enterprises, and couldn't challenge the highly innovative, for instance, enterprises from better developed regions. So it is clear situation that some regions, some parts of the common market is better off. The other regions or states, member states, lagging after the more richer and competitive regions. So the simple solution how to make this those differences a little bit more balanced is a cohesion policy. So it is European transfers of money which could support lagging regions and weaker member states. And it is why European politicians established cohesion policy in the EU as a basic tool to accommodate those differences occurring on the common market. In that respect, it is very difficult to understand why, in current stage of political situation in the EU, some politicians from western part of the EU want to suspend financial transfers, for instance, to Poland and Hungary, in the name of breaking the rule of law or other European values. But in fact, it is quite different logic, which was related to European transfers, which is related to liberal common market, but not European values and rule of law. So it is the first part of my presentation. The second part is related to maybe other economic projects which were developed in Europe recently, or maybe historically. I mean, the first one is common currency, Eurozone, and climate policy. As far as Eurozone is concerned, it is very difficult to apply the same redistributive logic as towards asymmetrical relations on the common market. Of course, Eurozone is also highly unbalanced with huge macroeconomic and other economic differences inside this area. But the problem is that it is difficult to establish enough of money to challenge to those problems, to make the redistributive policy the only solution for such a huge differences. The one of very important argument against redistribution across the Eurozone is that it is not only important to soften the economic imbalances, but also to produce more competitive economy on the southern part of the Eurozone. And without serious, sometimes severe reforms, it is difficult to establish more competitive economy, for instance, in Italy or Greece or other southern members of the Eurozone. So it is, we can see, at least in part of scientific literature argument, that more redistribution soften reforms in the south of the Eurozone. So, and so it is one of the problems. The second one is related to huge amount of money which should be mobilized for such a transfers to balance, to stabilize Eurozone. Even if we take into consideration the recent attempt to establish European Recovery Fund, it is quite a huge amount of money, but according to experts, it's not enough for stabilization of Eurozone, particularly financial system. So it is a huge question mark what to do with Eurozone. And it is difficult to provide any responsible solution, but only redistribution presumably would not fix all the problems. And the final issue is related to climate policy. It is also a very ambitious project which delivers, for instance, inflation in Europe. And increase of in prices, energy prices, which could pass to other areas of economy. But what is highly important, it also requires some kind of redistribution between richer and weaker parts of the EU, taking into consideration particularly the starting point of the situation, climate situation given a member state. For instance, Poland has the starting point the lowest in Europe because the energy system is based on dirty energy resources. So in comparison to France or even to Germany, it needs much more investment than in Western parties. So it should require some kind of assistance, some kind of redistribution from European budget. But this kind of support is still not enough. And the capacity, financial capacity, even of the richest state to support such countries like Poland is, of course, not enough for needs. So, to some extent, is the same problem like with Eurozone, that European ambitions are too high for capacities, for resources available in the continent to support particularly weaker member states. And this solution in this extent would be to limit a little bit ambitions. For instance, the pace of proposed changes for climate project or climate protective project. So it is my final remark. My question to Professor Krysiak is if we have any more time to say a few sentences about the systemic future of Europe.
So you would like to add something?
Yes, particularly my colleagues, previous speakers, said many interesting words about the future of Europe. For instance, Professor Mazurkiewicz, but also other. I would like to underline maybe four very important systemic direction for discussion about the future of Europe, which could to some extent support what my predecessors said. First of all, I agree with those voices which see the hope for Europe in bringing back the subsidiarity principle. It is highly important to make the EU more decentralized and more subsidiary, and European institutions like European Commission should not over centralize their powers, but rather to support member states, particularly those ones which are weaker in terms of achieving European targets, like in climate policy. The second remark is related to the notion that European Union should remain a democratic organization, and I can see quite different tendencies. So, of course, the EU is not a state. The EU is not a federal state yet, but it doesn't mean, in my opinion, that democratic standards should not apply to the EU. We very often can hear that democratic standards can apply to states, to member states, for instance, or other states, because they are states. The EU is not states, so it is only organization in the way of development. So democratic standards should not apply to this institution or organization. In my view, it is wrong approach. What is even more important, we could soften so-called democratic deficits in the EU by, for instance, creating civic platforms, some civic organization, participation in European decision-making process, etc. But it only softens democratic deficit. What is much more important is to, in my view, to preserve national democracies, the democracies in member states. It is much more important and challenging task for the EU, not to constrain democracies in the member state, because in fact national democracies are foundation for the whole democracy in Europe. My third point is that European Union should be law-abiding organization. In my view, it doesn't mean that only member states should preserve the principle of rule of law. Rule of law should abide also European institutions. We have no procedure to control the rule of law inside the European institutions. And we have many doubts if European institutions, for instance, not extends its powers beyond European treaties. Professor Mazurkiewicz mentioned this problem. And my final remark is related to management of crisis. A very repeated postulate we can hear is that because of so many consecutive crises, we should centralize management, we should improve management. For instance, we should deliver more majority voting problems to intergovernmental institutions, etc. And of course, centralize powers in the institutions like European Commission, for instance. In my view, it is it could be counterproductive, particularly in terms of sustaining or preserving democratic standards in Europe. So my concluding remark or proposal is to disseminate or apply also other institutional solutions which could combine improving of management with some principles of democracy. And it is, for instance, more flexible management, coalition of the willings, differentiated integration, other methods to resolve crisis, but with some protection of democratic verdicts in member states. If a majority of voters don't want to participate in given European measure of public policy, European public policy, it should be respected by the majority of decision makers in European institutions. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for having me on this very important conference.
Yeah, Professor Grosse, thank you very much. Just could you switch that echo? Something. Yeah, Professor Grosse, thank you very much indeed for your great stuff you did, you delivered. Remember, we are preparing this kind of a report or book, and we expect all of you have some, a contribution to that. And now I would like to invite, of course, Professor Grosse and everybody stay with us, invite the next great speaker from Hungary, Tamás Bernev, who is a Chief Executive Officer in the Hungarian Office for Enhancement of Development Advisory. So, and you are invited to speak on the topic which is stated as a question: how to achieve a fair share of European Union direct funds for Central East European member states. So, dear Tamás, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Professor, thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks for the opportunity to speak from Budapest, Hungary. And I would like to build on the thoughts that have been already voiced by Professor Grosse about the economic dimension of how to renew the European Union. I would even say I would like to talk about the other hand of the magician. And I will come back to why I'm saying this. Before that, just a little bit of introduction. Yes, I'm actually the CEO of this somewhat strangely named institution, which we call MFOI Advisory. It's a very new institution. That's why I chose this background, which is an empty office. It's not as empty as on the picture, but we are still building it. It's about making it possible for Hungary and for Central and Eastern European member states to achieve a higher share of the so-called direct funds of the EU. A bit more on that very soon. And another identity of mine, to use a loaded word, is to also represent Matthias Corvinus Collegium, which is the Budapest-based Hungarian talent fostering institution, which is based on very much the same values as the Schuman Group and the whole conference today. Here I am a research fellow working on seeing the interactions between the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. So in both of these positions, I'm really glad to be here. I'm honored to be here. And let me give you a bit of explanation of why I'm going to talk about direct funds, what I call the other hand of the magician. I also have to add that most of my life I've been a banker, so I'm going to talk about money. But then all my life I've also been a Roman Catholic, so I will be talking about money with respect to solidarity and how to express the idea of a more just and a more equally positioned countries in the whole of whole of Central and Eastern Europe. As a means towards that end, we have funds, we have the economic policies of the EU, and that's why this is the topic of my contribution. Now, why are we talking about the other hand of the magician? Well, you know, the joke refers to the idea refers to the situation where there is a magician on the stage, and there is something that he tries to convey with the moving of one of his hands, usually something which draws the attention away from what he actually does with the other hand. And that's when the trick happens. Well, the direct funds are sort of this other hand of the magician, and that's why I would like to talk about that, and that's why actually our institution has been established. Why are these funds called direct? A little bit of background, and I try to be not too technical about it. So, as I'm sure you all know, every 7 years there is a decision on the budget of the EU, the so-called multi-annual financial framework, and this is the point where there are the very, very big debates about exactly those kind of funds that Professor Grosse has also referred to, the cohesion funds, the structural funds in general, the common agricultural policy, and so on. And this is the time when everybody's attention is focused on the discussions about which national envelope becomes how big and what national envelope contains what sort of funds. This is the kind of debate where everybody is focused. This is the hand of the magician that we all follow. And this is when, for every 7 years, big decisions are taken in one go, or at least in 1 year, usually, obviously, through other rounds and through several institutions. But the other hand of the magician is hidden. The other hand is that after all these debates, there is roughly 25 to 33% of the total EU budget, which still remains on the table. Remaining on the table means that it's actually put into some funds for which you have to directly apply as a enterprise, as a university, as a consortium of universities and SMEs or large companies. So anyway, as an actor of the economic life of any of the member states, you have to directly apply for them. You cannot apply for them from your national government, hence the name. That's why the name is direct funds. Now, these funds are very, very different from each other. There are actually 24 such funds in this cycle of 2021-2027, so the current 7-year budget, and their role is growing. In the previous 7 years, there used to be only 25% of the total budget, of the total EU budget, about which so many debates are done. So 25% was left on the table, was left to be dealt with by the other hand of the magician. In the current 7 years, this is already 33%. And they openly say that they want to raise this share. So the role of these direct funds is becoming more and more important. And having said that, okay, just one more number, just to give you an idea about what kind of money we are talking about. The total direct funds in these 7 years are actually almost 340 billion euros. 340 billion euros for the 27 member states. So, like in the case of the indirect funds, there is a lot of money to be talked about and a lot of money to actually, as I said, express the goals of solidarity, express the goals of a more just Europe, if handled right. But they are not. When I say they are not handled right, then I say that there is especially Eastern-Western divide here. Not that much of a North-South, but rather an Eastern-Western divide. There is a very skewed, very one-sided, very lopsided kind of distribution. To back it up with numbers, in general, out of these 24 funds, in the previous 7 years, no Central and Eastern European state has reached more than double its population share. Or to put it even more simply, the totality of the 13 Central and Eastern European member states, so those who joined, like Poland and Hungary, in or after 2004, reached only 15% of the total of these funds. Whereas all the rest, in those years it used to be 15, UK included, actually was 85. Or more particularly, if you look at, for example, the Visegrad countries, the V4 countries, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovakia, well, here, for the two most important funds, which is Horizon, which is about innovation and research and development, and LIFE, which is about climate, a goal which is so important for the EU, there the population share would be 14%. So the 4 Visegrad countries put together have the 14% of the total population of the EU. What have we actually got from these two funds? 3% from Horizon, 7% from LIFE. So 3 from Horizon, 7 from LIFE, and we are representing 14% of the population. So the facts are actually underlying, or the facts are showing that there is really a lack of solidarity and a lack of just distribution here. Why? A little bit on the reasons, and then I would just put forward some ideas about what to do. One of the reasons is a very, very tricky solution on behalf of the EU, and this is also relating very much to what Professor Grosse has been explaining, that there is this idea of excellence that you have to reward by giving out direct funds, meaning it's an absolutely liberal approach. It doesn't matter where you come from, it only matters how good you are, in principle. What happens in practice is that I personally have seen just one example. A Dutch enterprise that spent 8 million euros on developing so-called foldable containers. Such a foldable container is actually worth roughly 10,000 euros, and they already exist. So the problem is they have spent a lot of money on something which is absolutely not appropriately priced, and nothing resulted from it. That much about excellence, and this hasn't come from somewhere in the East. This is a Dutch enterprise. Or my favorite example, there was a research grant for a Spanish lady who wanted to see around the world whether salsa, the dance salsa, has become part of the culture in most of the parts of the world. And surprise, surprise, she found out that, for example, in New Zealand, they don't know salsa. And that was 1.5 years and some 100,000 euros of a research grant based on excellence. So we cannot really say, and there are examples for that. We cannot really say that this is a true excellence-based meritocracy. This is actually rather a fig leaf that we say excellence, or they say excellence is the basis for a decision. Then the second is that, well, there is insider. If you don't mind this word, this is actually a criminal offense, but there is a little bit of, how to put it mildly, close relationship between some of the evaluators and some of the applicants. One year, somebody is playing the role of the evaluator, and the other year is part of an applicant consortium. And this is obviously at least helping with information, not to say more. And then the goals themselves, how these applications, how these tenders where the applications can put in are framed, actually represent the way the large Eastern European member states are looking at the world. For example, in energy, their, let's put it mildly, priorities are on top. Their approach to what size of enterprise and what size of application is preferable are actually prioritized, and so on. So actually, this is more of an insider game for Western European companies and universities than a totally just solidarity-based system for the continent. And then, to be frank and really give the other part of the spectrum as well, or the other side of the coin rather, since we're talking about money. On our side, from the CE, there are some shortcomings as well. We do have a bit of an over-reliability on those structural funds that we mostly are very good at obtaining and debating about every 7 years, or at least to speak about Hungary, we have been pretty successful in that, which was a bit of a problem when it came to actually directing the attention of our potential applicants to these funds. Then there is a bit of lack of language skills, let's be very honest. Sometimes the way these applications should be written are a sort of very technical, bureaucratic language, which we actually have to learn and use to be successful. And there is still a lack of network across the old division lines of East and West, and we in this part of Europe don't have enough of a network with leading universities and leading enterprises of the West. This is becoming easier and easier as the years go by, but it's still part of the reality. So this is, in short, what I would say on a diagnostic level. We have a true imbalance in a very important part, in 1/3 of the total budget of the EU, which nobody knows that much about, which is, as I said, the hidden hand of the magician. What can we do? Our company is actually an example of what can be done, because the Hungarian government has established it this year, and it's a fully government-owned enterprise. We opened the Brussels office. We want to collect information and disseminate it, not just for Hungary, but across Central and Eastern Europe towards our friends. We also want to be part of the effort to create these consortia, not just across the East-West divide, but at least as much across the countries of our region, because let's be honest, once again, we don't always cooperate as much as we could when we have to form that front that actually Professor Krysiak mentioned in one of the earlier notes, when we actually have to stand side by side. And we also, on a longer run, and that's my final thought about the topic and my final point is this presentation, we also have to sort of penetrate the institutions that actually work with these funds. Because let's be honest, one thing is to actually have good applications and win more of the funds. And another level is to be part of how these funds are structured, what kind of applications are preferred, and how the whole system works. And I think, and that would be my conclusion, this is also true on a wider scale. This is also true on the way we should approach how Europe and the European Union is developing based on the Schuman traditions and not based on the current, trends, let's put it that way, which is that, first of all, from unsuccessful applicants, we have to become successful applicants, but then with time, we have to also become part of the decision-making. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Tamas, for that, I think, very concrete, project. And as well, I see very big perspective about, added value to if we, integrate and consolidate and create a coalition, because this is basically unfair. It's not equal, shared, distributed. But these funds, in fact, this money can have very big influence, impact on basically development, economic development, of course. And in fact, this is something I was not much aware, especially from the perspective of the concept how to approach that, how to implement some certain strategy. And thank you very much indeed that, shared with us. Thank you very much indeed that the Hungarian government, established such a company. And we would like, as not only Institute of Schuman Thought, but we would like, to just attract many institutions, potentially in Poland, and as well probably together in the three CIS countries, to go with this ahead so that we can, get a bigger power, so that to pick up more of these funds, because you put very, a professional, approach to that, because it's not just, we need to fight to pick up some share of this, but to be very professional, to have arguments, and be successful in creating that coalition. Could you add some few sentences against that, my considerations?
Thank you very much. I absolutely agree with you. And this was part of the initiative. And this is also why we call our company not just something Hungarian in its international name, because we are absolutely convinced that the more we cooperate in our countries, in our regions, and actually together these consortia, the stronger we can become also as applicants. So it's absolutely true that both the realization that there are such funds like this to be obtained, and then the work on these fights, as you put it, has to be also professionally coordinated and actually played in the way the game is played today in terms of the Brussels decision making about direct funds. And as I said at the end, it's a great idea and my personal goal to actually change a bit the change a bit of the nature of this game. But before that, we actually have to align ourselves and play together to win on the current terms. So yes, we would be very much open to cooperation, and also based on this conference, open to partnerships.
Yeah, thank you very much again. And now I would like to invite, the Botond Csagany from Hungary, and he's from Mateusz Corvinus Collegium, and he will talk about the very hot topic, topic which is related to the, security of the borders. The question to you is, what does the future hold for Frontex? And you are going, as I know, to present some case study, explaining that, trying to respond to the question. So the Botond Csagany has a presentation. So Richard, be so kind, to put the presentation on the screen. Yes. Okay. So we have it. Yeah. Thank you very much. So, Botond, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation for Mr. Professor Krysiak. It's a pleasure to be here. I also would like to greet Tomasz. It's good to see him again. We are from the same institution, Mateusz Corvinus Collegium. I am a student of the Collegium. Therefore, with a scholarship of the institution, I had the opportunity to travel to Warsaw for 3 months and to make a case study about Frontex. And this is what I found so far. The real question behind the movements of the institution, what we see so far, that the budget has erupted. And this was my hypothesis. I wanted to look inside the details to see what is going on, what is happening, and how does it look like from inside. So I would like to ask for the next slide, if it's possible, or if we have a remote controller here, I can also...
Just a second.
Okay. In the meantime, I can say that in the background, we can see a picture of one of the first corps of the Standing Corps. These are Category 1 soldiers, and they are officially Frontex servants, and they are working for the institution. And in the meantime, I think we have solved the issue with...
Next slide, Richard. Yes. Thank you very much.
Here we can see the honorable regulations about the institution. 2004 is the starting point for us. It was founded in 2004 by council regulation. We can say that it was baptized by fire because after the regulation was made, a huge migration crisis appeared on the horizon of the European Union. In Spain, in the Canary Islands, thousands of irregular migrants tried to reach the shores of the Canary Islands, and it was the first time to use this platform of Frontex to help Spain out of the situation. European countries use the platform of Frontex to give equipment, human resources to solve the crisis. The whole institution was founded after the terrorist crisis, the years of terrorist crisis. In 2001, of course, 9/11, but later on in 2004, the Madrid terrorist attack was also a facilitator of a willingness towards a security platform in the European Union. Later on, in 2015, another migration crisis has struck the European Union, and nevertheless, 1 year later, a new regulation with the ordinary legislative procedure made it possible to have a smoother approach in solving migration crisis. but a new one was inaugurated in 2019, which is a bit different from the other ones, but it's more important because a new part of the institution was made, namely the standing core, which I will touch upon a bit later. Next slide, please.
Next slide.
Yes, here we can see the current organizational structure of Frontex. I know at first it looks a bit confusing, but everything is very well connected. In the management board, there are the representatives of the Commission, of Frontex, and also the member states. And as we are going down, we can see a more pragmatic approach towards solving the crisis in the European Union. On the left side, we can, for example, see the risk analysis unit, which is a very important part of the institution. They are dealing with the practical experiences of the migration crisis. They put the statistics into papers, and they try to detect migration flows regarding our borders. Another very important part of the institution is the return division, which we can see in the middle. They are dealing with the returns of the migrants who were rejected, whose asylums were rejected after the screening processes. They weren't given the rights of asylum. And there are two units, as we can see. One of them is voluntary. So if the irregular migrants accept the decision and will go back to their countries voluntarily, the institution will help them. But of course, unfortunately, there are forced returns where the institution has to pressure those people to go back to their countries with officers from Frontex. And also, right from there, we can see the new unit of standing core. This is the first law enforcement. This is for the first time a law enforcement group of the institution, and this is going to be a very important division for our future in the European Union. And we can also see on the left side that also fundamental rights officers, accounting officers, data protection officers are assigned to check the institution, and they are always checking what is happening inside the institutions, if it's really binding to the fundamental rights of the European Union. So these are basically the checkings of the institution. And we can also jump on the next slides, please. Yes, it's very important to note that we have to make it clear what are the competencies of the institution. And in this regard, the 2019 regulation is very clear, especially Articles 36 and 41. And we see on the website of Frontex a very, very clear briefing, which is make it clear for us to see what are the competencies, who is competent to do what. And therefore, I would like to read it out. An operation may be launched by the agency upon a request very important, from a member state facing challenges at its external border. The agency's executive director can also recommend a joint operation or rapid border intervention to a member state based on the results of the voluntary assessment. But, and this is not here, the member state can react to this recommendation within 6 days, and of course can reject the recommendation of the executive director. So it's up to the member states to request the help, and also they can reject the offered help if they want to. This also happened in Lithuania. Lithuania requested the help from Frontex. On the other side, on the contrary, Poland didn't. We will touch up on this later. We can go on the next slide. Yes, the duties of Frontex, which is made it clear in Article 10 in 2019. There is a very long very long queue here. I think it goes down to X and Z, so I just put the first four. But for example, letter A is dealing with the risk analysis unit, monitoring migration flows and carry out risk analysis. And also they are carrying out vulnerability assessment of the borders. They are looking for the weak points of the borders geographically. Also, they are checking the capabilities of border guards. And for example, with this, there are tons of information for the member states, and many of the national border guard units are using Frontex data because its risk analysis data are one of the best in the world. We can also go on the next slide. And the budget. That's why I chose this topic a few months ago. We can see in 2005 it was 6 million euros. It's not even a good deal to sign a football player nowadays. But in 2021, it's pretty good. 543 million euros. And we can see on the data of Statista that this is indeed a very big improvement. And on the next slides, we can also go on to the next slides. We can see where is the money going. So first of all, there is as you may know, the headquarters is currently in Warsaw, next to the Uprising Museum, close to Rondo Daszyńskiego. But now they are on the way of moving closer to the Chopin Airport. The lands are already bought, and I think this move towards the airport is because of two reasons. One, the current institutions is not enough. The institution is growing very fast. Its civil servants are nearly 10 times bigger as in the beginning. And the airport is also very important because that's how the institution can connect to Brussels, to other European capitals, which is very important for Frontex. And as we can see, it is very close to the Chopin Airport. We can also go on to the next slide. Yes, and this is the standing core. This is a new part of the institutions. In the institution. By 2021, the institution will comprise 10,000 people. In the beginning, it was 150. In 2006, will comprise 10,000 people. Among them, 3,000 will be Category 1 officers. Category 1 officers will have a contract of 5 years, which can be extended to another 5 years. And they are the ones who can be deployed either in at the headquarters to have the everyday work of Frontex, or sent to the external borders of the European Union. They don't also Frontex is not all about migration. They are also dealing with smugglings, and the smugglings of migrants, of drugs. Risk analysis. So the 10,000 is showing that the EU turned its head towards this issue and wants to solve it. 7,000 of them will be seconded from member states, which is a greater number compared to 3,000. That's why it can be considered kind of a shared institution between member states and the European Union. It is growing very fast. For the first time in the history of the EU, a common uniform was accepted, which was seen on the first pictures. It was January the 1st when this uniform was inaugurated, and this is the uniform of all the standing corps officials. We can also go on the next slide. So, standing corps. In the standing corps, there are special profiles. These border guards or coastal guards don't only tackle migration, they are also tackling other kinds of issues which are related to border crimes. For example, one of the honorable mentions on the left side, and which is very important for Germany, it's motor vehicle crime detection, because in Hungary, Romania, Poland, these are the regions when German stolen cars are going to the Balkans, to Turkey, to Belarus, and there is a huge need for very, very specialized officers in this regard. Therefore, very professional detection officers are always welcomed at the borders in these kind of cooperations. And also, if these detection officers can speak German, it also facilitates the problem solving in this regard. Also, there are debriefing officers who can talk to the asylum seekers, who will assess the information regarding their past. They also try to touch upon how did they arrive to the European Union, which later on can be passed to other parts of the institution, and also sent to Europol, and with that they can reach those migration routes where smugglers are very active. And for example, it is very interesting. These smugglers are very, very professional. There is a huge solidarity needed to tackle these issues because they are also developing. They are using drones to detect, for example, Greek ships. Where are the ships right now? And if they are not there, they see it with the drones. They are instantly going with ships with the irregular migrants. We can, I think, also, and of course there are average border guard officers. What we can see when we are passing out of the European Union, and they can have the right to ask for the passports of the citizens of the European Union if the member states let it. We can also go on to the next slide. Yes, and that's here is one of the issues which will determine the future of the institution. It is under constant pressure from both sides, from both the parliament and from also the member states. The parliament, for example, it's very new. It's always, that's why it was very hard to conduct the research. It is constantly changing every 2 weeks. There are other news. And this was 3 weeks ago. The European Parliament has the opportunity to pressure institutions with the discharge procedure. Here they have the exclusive right to approve the budget implementation of EU institutions. And here they made it clear that they want the institution to develop. They want to put up deputy directors, and it happened 2 weeks ago as well. And they wanted more so-called checkers to check the institution, like human rights violations, because also the Commission and other NGOs criticize Frontex because it doesn't reflect that much on human rights violations. It's very politicized, but everything is clear in the treaties, I think. So if the member states wants to help, it can help. If not, it cannot help. We can also go on to the next slide, I think. Yes, and the conclusion, just to conclude, as I mentioned earlier, everything is clear according to the treaties. What we can do now is to use Frontex as in the past, as a sign of solidarity towards other European countries, and also the very good professional expertise of the servants are important when there is the chance to tackle irregular migration crisis, but also as we can see, 10,000 soldiers are not enough to defend, for example, the Polish border. There are more than 20,000 of Polish border guards at the eastern border with Belarus. And clearly it's visible that Frontex is just a supporter institution. And I think this is the conclusion of my PowerPoint. As a supportive institution, it can help, but it shouldn't take the role of the member states to defend our borders.
Okay, thank you very much, Patron, for a very interesting presentation, because, you know, this is a topic which is raising interest of many people around Europe, especially, you know, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, you know, Hungary, Italy, you know. And basically, as we see, you know, the budget, which is currently 2021, this is equal to that what we need to build defense on the border with Belarus. And the European Commission is not willing, you know, to support financing defense with Belarus. And nobody understands this. So how they would like, you know, to protect. So it seems to be, in fact, many things to be, I mean, a change, because with that resources, with that approach, you know, of the European Commission, we cannot build a right defense, you know, for that basically to keep the security. But then in a way, Patron, thank you for that. You presented the where we are, how it looks like, you know, and we see that basically the Frontex is based on the bureaucracy. Of course, some areas of that, departments are needed, of course, but they do not deliver a real, you know, defense. As we see the development of that, you know, a corps over 7 years, up to 10,000. We don't know what will happen tomorrow, or excuse me, in next year, in the beginning, you know. The inflow of these migrants is going to be bigger and bigger, right? So it seems to be still, you know, these guys in the Brussels that do not, they are far from the reality. Okay, but anyway, thank you for that excellent, explanation. And, you know, the young man from the Mateusz Corvinus Collegium, and we think as the Institute of Schuman thought that we should promote such a young people in that building the coalition on the European front, you know, to come back to the Schuman Europe, Schuman front. Okay, so now, you know, we have, you know, some time for certain inserts or some short feedback, and I would like, you know, invite Professor Michał Severiński, if you would like, you know, referring to any issue, to any presentation which were until now. Professor, yeah, go ahead, and we would have a pleasure, you know, to hear your remarks on any topics until now. Go ahead.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. It will be only a couple of remarks, mainly political and legal of character. So I would like to say, which is clear for everybody, that nowadays we register a growing pressure, a growing tendency to transfer European Union into the typical state, federal state, and one has to say that there are some fundamentals for this approach, for this policy. First is that country members, member states to the European Union, they have transferred already some competencies, some political competencies. And according to this transfer, some functions, political functions, could be executed by the European Union organs, as Parliament, as Commission, as Luxembourg Court. What is more, within the Treaty on European Union, one can find a set of values, common values, which are supported, which are respected by all country members, as for example, democracy, rule of law, justice. There are much more than. And this set of values is considered as a green light to the institutions of European Union to enter into the daily practice, political practice, justice functioning, and so on and so on. We can see it, this tendency, especially within the policy, within the decisions of the Luxembourg Treaty. So I have to stress also that as far as the Polish constitution is concerned, it is said very clearly that, of course, the Republic of Poland, by virtue of international agreements, they delegate to an international organization or international institution the competence of organs of state authority in relations to certain matters, not all matters, but certain matters. So what is necessary, in my opinion, to do within the present state of Treaty of Lisbon Treaty and the Treaty on European Union, with the present state of our constitution, the constitution of some other European Union countries, it's not possible to transfer directly the machinery of the European Union into the virtual state. It could be achieved going via the new treaty, the new European Treaty, making a clear definition, containing the definition of all of the competences of organs of the European Union. It has to be clearly said what is allowed for the European Union Tribunal, what is allowed to the European Committee, the Commission, and the same to the Parliament, European Parliament. And what is not allowed, what is the end of their competences. If we are not doing so there won't be possible to stop this machinery, to stop this tendency towards the European Union state, federal state, or as you wish, could be another. This is a very hard political task. First of all, to convince people taking the key positions nowadays within the European Union, and to oppose to those tendencies to transfer nowadays European Union as a rather international organization towards the future solid state and so on. This is a couple of remarks I had in my head. I have in my head since many times. Being a senator, we have a lot of unofficial debates, discussions towards, because one can see clearly that there is a turning point nowadays. And to change the situation, to improve the situation, to make it clear and accepted by all countries, we need the new treaty. That is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Michał Seweryński. Professor Seweryński was many years Vice Chairman of the Polish Senate, and your expertise, we appreciate very much indeed. So thank you for that contribution, and stay with us, and we go ahead now to ask Norbert Kleinwächter, a member of the Bundestag, to talk about how the model of the European Union institutions should be changed to stop building the superstate. So, Norbert, thank you very much indeed. You are with us, and again, we have a young man, very enthusiastic to stop the superstate. And I'm happy, you know. So go ahead, the floor is yours.
Absolutely. I'm destined to stop the superstate. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Norbert Kleinwichter. I'm the vice president of the AfD parliamentary group in Deutscher Bundestag. And maybe you know that AfD is a party which is very critical of the European Union at its current state, also very critical of the euro as a currency. That was actually our founding issue, that we said this currency is not working and we need to get out of it. But now, of course, criticism also refers to the European Union and to its tendency to draw sovereignty from the member states. And we're convinced that this should not happen. We're convinced that national sovereignty needs to be kept up, also to preserve democracy. Before I start presenting what we're suggesting as a reform step to stop this super nationalization of the European Union, I would simply like to reply to one of the first comments that were made in this conference by Professor De La Fuente, for instance, who said that this is a very German, or that this is a German attempt to take over basically other member states and the European Union as such. And my impression, however, is that unfortunately, and I need to say unfortunately, it's not only a German problem. When you listen to debates on the Council of Europe in the Parliamentary Assembly, for instance, you notice that basically the entire groups around the socialists and the Greens are supporting, and also ALDE, so the liberals, are supporting this model of centralizing the European Union to become a super state. So it's no longer just a German issue, even though it is carried by former Chancellor Merkel, by now Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and of course by Ursula von der Leyen, who is the EU Commissioner, President of the Commission, thanks to the intervention of Merkel and Macron. But it's actually a bigger problem than just German policy. It has to do with a small elitist group of certain political directions who think that basically centralizing everything in the European Union would be advantageous. In the best case, they just think that then, you know, we can better face problems of defense or of trade issues, but also I believe that there is the real attempt to actually draw away from democracy and replace it with some kind of council democracy, as we can see it in the Conference on the Future of Europe as well. As you know, there is this conference going on, initiated by Ursula von der Leyen, suggested originally by, this is not very creative, Emmanuel Macron. And this conference does not work in the field of representative democracy that we actually know. So we have no representatives there, but we have a sort of council democracy, which means that people, citizens, are selected by NGOs to participate in these conferences, and then these so-called random participants actually make suggestions for the reform of Europe. And it's not surprising that they're suggesting a change of the treaties, that they are changing to form a European superstate with a European super parliament that also is not elected member state by member state, but through transnational lists. So this would be a complete change in the way the European Union is structured, and it would be a danger for our democracies and for the tradition in our member states, because basically national sovereignty cannot be done away with in Europe. That's our real conviction, because if you want to preserve democracy, you need to preserve the link between the people and the decisions that are made. And the people, however, throughout Europe are very different one from each other. We have a different history. We have different cultural appreciations and also different languages and different institutional setups, which make it very difficult to make one policy that fits all. And that's actually also the problem that the European Union tends simply not to see. Basically, when the European Union tries to imply something, the effect is often counterproductive. And a few speakers have said this already in this, by the way, very interesting conference. This conference is much better than a lot of the reports that we get in the parliament. So my compliments to you, Professor Krysiak. And again, thank you for inviting me to be a speaker here. Anyway, we see that if we want to keep up the link between people and decisions, we need to keep the national framework. This does not exclude cooperation with neighbors and friends, but it does exclude a supranationalization of the European Union. So when we talk about how this all could come about, we realize that we have a couple of regulations in the Treaty on the European Union and also in the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, which tends to be abused more and more. So the European Union has become sort of a system that's trying to self-aggrandize, to get more and more powers, to get more the ability to take more and more decisions. And I think it's a quote from Jean-Claude Juncker, who said, well, we'll simply do it, we'll put it in the room, and if no one contradicts, then it's basically reality, it's a fact. And that's the way the European Commission has for a long time now tried to expand its powers and to expand its own sovereignty, but of course at the cost of the national sovereignties of the member states, and at last at the cost of the people, because the people are the ones losing out in the supranationalization process. It's not necessarily the companies, especially bigger companies, especially investors of large sums of money benefit from this kind of supranationalization. They benefit from a centralization with the same rules and especially very easy access to capital markets and to investments. But these investments and these capital markets are usually not open to the regular normal citizen. They're not open to the so-called, as we say in German, Mittelständler. So those are like middle-sized entrepreneurs and companies. They are usually open just for big investors, and they benefit from this kind of constriction, but normal people are losing out. And what we see right now is, and we see that in all the debates, is that the lefts are trying to base their idea of expanding the European Union on what they call European values. And these European values, they're laid down in the treaties, and they're not bad as such. But, you know, a change in the definition of these terms makes it possible to turn the entire European construction around. The treaties on the European Union talk about an area of freedom, of democracy, of equality, of the rule of law, and respect for human rights. And it's especially those last two terms in Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union that basically justifies these entire attacks that we're seeing on Poland, on Hungary, because there's a presumed breach of the rule of law and an assumed breach of the respect for human rights. And they also often refer to the area of freedom, security, and justice, which then they claim can only be preserved in a construction of the European Union. The major problem, however, is the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, because it has allowed a differentiation that does not really work. As you know, the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union actually distinguishes certain types of competences for the European Union. There are exclusive competences where basically only the European Union can make laws on. And then there are also so-called divided competences or split up competences, where basically both the Union and the member states can make laws, but the member states will only do that if and insofar the Union has not exercised its competence. And that's an interesting legal figure, because it means that basically as soon as the European Union does something, makes a legal act, the member states are unable to make a democratic decision on that because it is already a union law. And the result of that is that in our parliamentary practice that we see every day, and I'm on the Commission on European Affairs and also on External Affairs, basically we only get the ready done EU legislative acts, and then the question that's only debated in Parliament is how can we adapt our national legislation to fit to what's been said by the European Union. So there's no democratic debate on, what should actually be done. There's only a democratic debate on how our legislation needs to be adapted to fit to, what's already been framed by the European Union. And that is, of course, not what democracy is about. That's, of course, not what the link between the people and the decisions are about. When we discuss how this is possible, we need to look at the institutions of the European Union, and I hope it will work out that I share my little presentation with you that I prepared. There is something, so maybe it will work out. And I think you can see the presentation now. So this is a very short overview, and I stole this from the European Parliament of the major EU institutions. And as you can see, national member states basically almost are not part of this construction, and they're mentioned below. So the European Parliament, as a voice of the people, as it says, is very, very remote from the people of the member states. The maximum number of parliamentarians per nation is 92. So if you compare that to the 513 million EU citizens and about 750 members of parliament, then basically you have very, very few members of parliament per EU citizen. And that they have a large legislative power, but actually they can only say yes or no because they cannot bring in motions. The only organ, the only institution that can actually mention or propose something to the European Parliament is the EU Commission in conjunction with the EU Council. And the European Commission, as we all know, is part of the problem because they are the ones trying to draw more and more competence to the European Union. They do have one commissioner per country, but they are actually chosen not to act in the national interest, as you can also see on the slide. And that is one of the reasons why Ursula von der Leyen, originally German, acts against German interests. So they can propose no new EU laws, and basically they do that all the time. As I said, there are more than 600 legislative proposals coming to the member state parliaments every year that the member state parliaments then have to convert into national law. We also have the Council of the European Union and the European Council as member bodies for the member states to kind of make a little bit of politics. Most of it actually happens in the Council of the European Union, where ministers from the member states meet. But some of it is also happening in the European Council, where the EU heads of state and government meet. And they always carry the EU summits. So how can we change the structure to make it more based on actual democratic decisions? Because what we can't see here is a role of the national parliaments. The national parliaments do not play a role in this entire EU lawmaking process. So the legislative bodies that the people elect in the national elections, that they believe in, that they know, because on the national level you still have some kind of connection to your member of parliament. It does not exist. The only role of the national parliaments in this EU construction is to elect a government, which then does what it wants, and of course needs the backing of the national parliaments, but the influence is very low. Everything's done by the European Parliament, which is very far away. And if we want to really base the European Union, if we want to form a community of European nations, it should not be a European Union, it should rather be a community of European nations that is at the service to the community members, then we should actually change the structure profoundly and do away with institutions that are not at the service of the community members and that do not serve a community idea of the European nations, but that are sort of bodies to form a European Union as a federal superstate, which, as I mentioned, does not work because we're not the United States of America, where there's a common immigration history. We're not that kind of country. We're basically several nations with a long history and tradition that have just decided to form together a community to deal with certain issues in a better way. So what we should do is actually cut out the European Parliament and replace it again with a representation of national parliaments. And we should also do away with legislative and budgetary power of the Council of the European Union. And we also need to address the structure of the European Commission, because there is no sense to have a commissioner of every member state, of every member country, if he's not supposed to act in the national interest. So you need to decide either you want to have someone acting in the national interest, or you don't have to have someone from every member state. And the reformed institutional structure will actually rely stronger on national parliaments who retain their legislative power and their budgetary power, and whose decisions in all member states are required to do something on the European level. National parliaments should define advisory boards and send experts elected by the national parliaments to those advisory boards where all member states are represented. And these member state representatives, of course, should also report to the national parliaments and actually try to make legal propositions with the European Union, European Commission, which would be a reduced commission with a president, 2 vice presidents, and a board, which would propose EU consensuses, prepare EU recommendations, and prepare EU legislations, or if we call it Community of European Nations, then of course also the abbreviation EU would be replaced. The national parliaments, of course, also elect their national governments and control them, which should decide on conclusions and suggest recommendations, again in the European Council and the Council of the European Union, which of course need to be retained as members and bodies where member states meet. However, this should be done in a consensus form, so everything should be univocal and not decided by qualitative majorities. The qualitative majorities could still play a role in doing away with structures and propositions and EU legislation that you do not want anymore, but it should be univocal to form new ideas and to form new transfers of sovereignty to the European level. So the major EU institutions remaining would be the EU Commission, new advisory boards, the European Council, Council of the European Union, the European Court of Justice, which of course is necessary to decide on trade issues and other things, and the Court of Auditors. We do not see the European Central Bank. We do not see these boards, which are basically mentioned and designed to form a common market and a common currency, which is an attempt to. There is no camera on. I don't know why this does not exist anymore. Here, I'll put it on again. Yeah, now. Which has been formed to basically form a economic union, out of which then a political union and a political national state could be formed. So, talking of this, basically we need to address the issue of how to rewrite the treaties of the European Union to form a community of European nations. We need to make some changes to the institutional structures, which I have just described. We also need to make a lot of changes to the structure of the treaties on the functioning of the European Union. We need to rethink divided and exclusive competences of the Union. And basically, we need to go back to the model that the European Community once had, namely that the EU Commission acts on request by member states. So that basically the member states say, we have this idea, we could do something like, as it's been presented, and which is certainly beneficial, Frontex, and then the EU Commission would hear something that all the member states accept, and then that is established. It should not be the other way around, that the EU simply acts, and if not enough member states contradict, it becomes basically an EU law. All these EU policies have actually contributed to splitting the European Union more than uniting it. And a lot of the issues, if we benchmark the EU policies, have actually not been done in a very, very good form. We see that when we talk about digitalization of Europe, that those initiatives taken by the European Union were not effective. We see in the amount of students who actually learn a foreign language that fewer and fewer students learn, for instance, French and German in Germany, even though that is our, say, biggest partner to the West. But we see that since 1990, the number of students who learn French, who study French at school, has declined, and that the number of students participating in student exchanges have declined. So basically, whenever the European Union tries to say we're doing something, we have a program, we're improving something, the effect is very often that things are not improved, but that they're actually made worse, because there's no acceptance for the issues, or the measures are just not very well done. We need to reform the European Union in a way that the dependency on Brussels decreases. We see also, just apart from the attempt to form more and more sovereignty on the European level, that the sovereignty on the European level and the competence that the Commission has on the European level is combined with the attempt to make certain areas, certain companies, or certain branches dependent on what happens in the European Union. We see that especially in the common agricultural policy, which is heavily subsidized. And the issue about the subsidy is that, of course, farmers and agriculturers can apply for these subsidies, but in order to receive them, they need to fulfill the conditions that the EU Commission sets for them. Right now, those are, for instance, climate conditions. Those are conditions on how to treat the soil, etc., what fruit to produce, and all that. And if a farmer says, well, this is not my way of doing it, I have a very different concept of how to plant and how to grow my fruit, and does not meet the subsidy criteria, basically this farmer is no longer competitive, because if he doesn't take the subsidies, he won't be able to pay for whatever he has to pay, and he won't be able to live from farming. So basically, it's also a system that forces everyone into cohering and into obeying these measures taken by the EU Commission. And it shows us that the EU Commission is going away from a democratic structure and actually turning towards a bureaucratic approach to administration, which it also exerts over democratically elected governments in member states. And that is something that can be a point where the European Union actually breaks apart, because, of course, it is not acceptable that the EU Commission, without any proper mandate, tries to influence how judicial reforms are made in member states, how people are treated in member states, how basically the economy is structured in member states. This has nothing to do with what the EU stands for, and this has nothing to do with EU competences. And I think that our member states, our European nations and countries, are only going to be successful if we eventually do away with this structure of the European Union and form a community of European nations, for which I have made some suggestions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, Norbert, thank you very much for that open-minded approach, and this is something which really, bring us closer, to that community of European nations. This, the model, changing this model really seems to be consistent, which is, involved in that name, Community of European Nations. In the different groups which are discussing or just, which are resisting against the superstate, this is just, they say, no, we don't like to go there, but we need to present proposals and indicate to the second side, or indicate to these guys going towards the superstate, that we have really, in fact, different proposals for the construction of the institutions, and to explain that this construction of this institution and basically the relationship between, a nation, in the institutional nations, and them is really efficient. I am really very much indeed supporting that approach, and this is something which expressed the Schuman the position. Schuman highlighted the European institution cannot be permanently established. They have to be established to perform some certain functions, but the functions of the service to the nations. And this model, this what you presented, is really bringing us closer to that. And we need to think, how to promote that. And this we will have, still today. Just stay with us, Norbert. Of course, we will have a time, to discuss and have a response from the audience about that. But I think, even if there will be, different arguments that this detail or this is not fully. Correct. So of course we can adjust this, but there is already a kind of some concrete proposal, which I think we never. I am not aware about that. Somebody presented something really very. That what. Many, I think, citizens of the countries in Europe are expecting, but the voice of the different political leaders, who are just leaders in the European Commission of the European institutions, together with the media, is just not allowing to raise the voice for the citizens. And now, of course, we need to think, how to promote something like that to discuss. We don't say this is a fully finished and ideal, solution, but this is something which is really worth to pursue. It's worth, to really to broad up, to different leaders in the nations. So thank you very much indeed. Stay with us. And now we would like, to listen to the Dr. Patrick Jaki, who is a member of the European Parliament. And he will, we will listen to his, show his presentation, because of different duties he was not able to come to us, but he was, very interested to record his presentation, so that we are taking his point of view. Go ahead, Mr. Patrick Jaki.
For the invitation to the debate. If I could understand, the key question is about the future of European Union. Should it return to the idea of the founding fathers, or create a superstate similar to United States? And to even consider the possibility of building a common state, we need to ask ourselves, is it possible to unify the current independent parts of the state, such as culture, history, identity, geopolitical goals, economy, social systems. It is hard not to see, however, the Germans and Poles, for instance, judge Bismarck in different way when we talk about history and identity, of course. When we talk about Bismarck, this is a good example. For Germans, he is a hero with monuments in every region. For the Poles, he is disgusting person. Poles see freedom in a different way through the perspective of the First Republic, and the freedom is also seen in a different way by the countries that surrendered Poland then. Today, Poland sees, another example, communism. Poland sees communism differently because we Polish people have personal experience. And France, not. So France sees it differently. That is why our political class has different attitude toward Russia than France. France see Russia as a potential partner because it is far away and can define shared goals, for example, in energy sector. And Poland looks at it otherwise, because Russia sees a place for it in its zone of influence and dreams of restoring Soviet Union. Yes, dreams of restoring Soviet Union. This is the plan. This is the Putin plan. That is why the Polish army developed plan differently, and the French army developed strategic plan differently. Because we are in the other place, and dangerous for Poland and for France look differently. As far as economy is concerned, Western Europe and Central Europe see another, for instance, transport sector differently. Interests are so opposite and profits so high that the so-called mobility package has shown what economic cooperation within superstate could look like, and what the stronger will win. The stronger will win. The same appeals to the social and economic system. For example, Western Europe wants to harmonize taxes because it knows that this is the area where the competitiveness of Central and Eastern European economies is built. And they are developing much faster than Western Europe countries. Creating a superstate and realizing the goals of the stronger ones would make the Western countries gain and the whole Europe lose. So in order for the idea of the superstate to be realistic, it is necessary to assume that, for example, Germany can give up the strategic plan and include, for example, Polish plan into them. And now have a look at the most important project realizing by the German strategy. His name is Energiewende, and of course, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. The idea was that it would bypass the Central European countries, and instead of building the infrastructure overland from Russia to Germany,
No sound.
A new plan, Ribbentrop-Molotov. She wanted to have a political weapon to blackmail the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. We see how it looks now in Ukraine. And Germany wanted to sell a gas at higher price to its friends from the European Union. In addition, for those who would not like this, a number of legal solutions have been adopted in the European Union, which forced them to do so. The project was rightly called, even by Sikorski, a new plan, Ribbentrop-Molotov. And letters from many countries, attacked from the journalists of the different media, from right to left, sanction from United States, resolution from European Parliament, all came to nothing. Germany did what it wanted anyway. They understood the word solidarity as the solidarity with the German plans. Those are just a few examples, of which there are many more, showing that the concept of the superstate strengthened Europe's largest country, mainly Germany, but made all Europe weaker. Another problem is that as well-functioning state must have a clear separation of powers. However, it does not exist in European Union. The European Parliament, which should be a legislative authority, has no legislative power to initiate the legislative path. The European Commission, which should be an executive power, has gotten too many competence and wants to be at the same time a legislative, executive, and judicial power. The highest judicial authority, Court of the Justice of the European Union, wants to take over all three powers, but not those of the European institution, but those of member states. Recently, even which constitutions are valid and which are not. We in Poland see now how it works. So they wanted to decide whether our constitution is still in power or whether not. It is an absurd. And what kind of solution I would like to propose for this weakness? And I think we need change and return to the times of Schuman. More Europe of homelands that works together on matters that they regard as a common, such a common market or Schengen area. However, each country must have the right to its own identity and history. Changes to the treaties are needed, and we need to move away from a double majority voting on key issues. We need to restore veto power. Then there must be more cooperation and less diktat, because if we create a system where the country which have more power every time winning, this is not Europe which Schuman builds. This is a diktat, and we need to end it. And Parliament and European Council and the European and Council of European Union as an institution elected by the people must be given more power and less power to European bureaucracy and European Commission. Power must be also clearly defined in the system of separation of power. The legislative power is exercised by the European Parliament in the matters referred to it, and by the national parliament in the others. The judges shall decide only within the scope of their clear competence, without being able to transfer themselves other competence, like the European Court of Justice try to do every week. The European Commission shall be an executive power only, and let the Council of the Union exercise control over it on the sectoral basis. All this to make the European Union more effective and more consensual. It will return where Europe belongs, to Schuman idea. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patryk Jaki, for a member of the European Parliament. Yeah, it seems to be consistent to that what we spoke until now, and as well consistent with that speech of the Norbert Klein-Wächter. And now I would like to ask for taking a floor Dr. Ewa Sałkiewicz, Munerlin, former ambassador at the Holy See, and I would like you touch the area. So I'm trying to answer the question: what are the urgent needs for changing the regulation environment of the European Union to stop the trials to argue and interpret that superstate is implied by the treaties? So, of course, be flexible with your speech, so do not be so framed by exactly that question. So, yeah, the floor is yours. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to present my paper called Two Visions of the EU Integration. And of course, from the legal point of view. And I would like to say that my presentation is based on the article, on the presentation of a former judge of our Constitutional Tribunal, who unfortunately passed away in 2017, Lech Morawski, because when I read what he said 10 years ago, it is absolutely actual here now. So that's why I would like to present my point of view based on his observation. One of the threats of the autonomy of the EU member states is the principle of primacy of the EU law over the law of member states. This principle, although it was never written into the EU treaties, and it's only a product of the jurisprudence of the court in Luxembourg, is recognized both by this court and the EU establishment as a cornerstone of European integration. So let us recall that the declaration to Article 17 of the Lisbon Treaty confirms the continuation of these principles and cites the words of the famous ECJ judgment of July 15, 1964. It is case Costa versus Inel, that a right created by a treaty cannot be set against any internal legal act in legal proceedings, since they would mean that the right would lose its community character and the very legal basis of the community would be called into question. The court's reasoning must be regarded as unconvincing. Why? Since there is no necessary connection between European integration and the adoption of the principle of the primacy of the EU law. It is also not clear and supported by any arguments that rejection of the principle of primacy of union law must lead to questioning of the idea of the European integration. At most, one can argue that questioning this principle leads to a rejection of the centralist and federalist model of European integration, but it is precisely this model of the EU that more and more states are opposing. Moreover, it seems that this questioning this principle of the absolute primacy of the EU law it guarantees that European integration will take place under the control of member states and not against their will. In turn, is precisely the fundamental message of the idea that European integration should respect the right to self-determination of all member states. We should recall now, almost a century ago, a famous jurist, Hans Kenzel. He argued that even federal states should reject the principle of the primacy of federal law over union law because it remains in flagrant contradiction with the very idea of federalism. Let us quote his words. He said, "It is one of the paradoxes of the theory of the federal state that it regards the principle of the federal law takes precedence over state law as allegedly corresponding to the essence of the state." He said, "It is easy to show that nothing contradicts the idea of the federal state more than this principle, which makes the political and legal existence of the federal states dependent on the goodwill of the federation, since it allows the federation through even the ordinary ordinance interfered with the power of the federal states. Nothing more, nothing less. If the supremacy clause threatens even the foundations of the federal system, then a fortiori it is completely at odds with the idea of the EU system. For this reason, I believe that the Republican project of the EU should be based not on the principle of primacy of the EU law, but on the principle of equivalence and a strict separation of powers between the EU and the member states, according to which not only the EU can pronounce on the compatibility with the national laws, with the EU law, but also the member states have the right to challenge the application of those EU regulations that are contrary to their constitution. Thus, if the Court of Justice of the European Union seriously wants to be a defender of the right to self-determination of the member states, as suggested by certain provision of the Lisbon Treaty, and not only a defender of the interest of the EU establishment, it has to reject the existing ideology of the application of EU law and above all, the conviction that the EU law must have absolute precedence over all provisions of the law of member states. The simple truth has been understood, but some constitutional courts, including Polish courts, of course, even recently, which without any hostility or dislike towards the idea of the European integration, have opposed its construction on the ruins of member states. Against this background, there is the doctrine of constitutional pluralism and constitutional identity, according to which the EU order should not violate the constitutional principles of member states. This doctrine has been referred in some form and another by constitutional courts of Germany, Italy, Belgium, Czech Republic, Poland, and the French Constitutional Court. Speaking of constitutional identity, it should be noted first of all that this concept is not a concept of the EU law and is a product of the doctrine and jurisprudence of some constitutional courts. The essence of the concept of constitutional identity is expressed by the assumption that the EU law cannot violate the constitutional order of the member states, or at least the principles of these orders, and that the member states have the right to protect their sovereignty. That is why they cannot be forced to transfer certain of their competence to the EU bodies or to apply EU rules that are contrary to their constitutional identity. It is with this in mind that we can define constitutional identity as the set of those provisions of the Constitution that constitute its hard core, or, using the German Constitutional Court term, the inviolable court of the Constitution. It can be said that the concept of the constitutional identity sets the boundaries of European integration, as it defines both the limits of the transfer of competence of the member states to the EU bodies and the limits of the application of EU laws within the territory of the member states. A state may, of course, renounce or limit its rights to self-determination and limits in sovereignty, but such a decision always remains with the member states and not with any EU bodies. It is also worth noting that the concept of inviolable competences may be defined differently in different constitutional orders, as it's obvious that the different countries may protect their right to self-determination in different ways. A spectacular example of recourse to the concept of constitutional identity can be found in the famous judgment of German Constitutional Court from 2009, 30 of June, on the Lisbon Treaty, and even before, in the 74 already, in the case of Solange I, and in the 1986, the Solange second two judgments. In this judgment, the German court, referring to the content of Article 23, paragraph 1, in conjunction with Article 79 of the German Constitution, states that without amending the 1949 Constitution, the EU law cannot violate the constitutional identity of the German people and deprive them of the right to self-determination of their own destiny. Accordingly, the German court has granted itself the right to review any act of the EU law and declare it inapplicable in Germany, if necessary, insofar as it violates the constitutional identity and right of self-determination of German people. The German Court of Justice listed in detail the categories of matters that, in its view, constitute the constitutional identity of the German state, and at the same time point out that the provision of the Constitution that protect constitutional identity are covered by the perpetual clause and cannot be amended, cannot be changed. The Polish Constitutional Tribunal also referred to this in its judgment of 19 May 2005, where it explicitly states that in case of an irremovable conflict between the norms of the EU law and our constitution, the constitution always prevails over the latter. The same thought is referred in the judgment of the Constitutional Court in Poland of 24 October 2010, in which it is assumed that the Constitution enjoys in its territory of the Republic of Poland the priority of validity and application. In the later judgments, the Constitutional Court also argues that the sovereignty of the Republic of Poland is expressed in the non-transferable competences of the organs of state authority, which constitute the constitutional identity of the state. The problem lies in the fact that Article 90.1, which speaks of transferring competence in certain matters to international organizations, is in fact a blanket term, and on its basis it is impossible to determine which competence may or may not be transferred. Incidentally, the question arises as to the relationship between the concept of national and constitutional identity. In my opinion, this interpretation of the provision of EU law is not correct, which, referring to the content of Article 4 of the Treaty of the European Union, the Union shall respect the national identities of the member states inherent in their fundamental political and constitutional structures. So this article assumes that the concepts of national and constitutional identity are identical. This was the interpretation relied upon by our Constitutional Court in its judgment of 24 November 2010. Rejecting this interpretation, I would like to point out that these two concepts refer to completely different issues. The concept of national identity refers to certain feature of the community that makes it political community. For example, common language, historical ties, tradition, etc. While the concept of the constitutional identity refers to those principles and constitutional provisions that a political community considers inviolable and non-transferable to any other body or organization not subject to its authority. The most serious objection against equating this concept is that the constitution need not always reflect the national or local identities of a political community. A project of the political system based on liberal principles can be in conflict with them. The message of the Republican project is to protect the right of the member states to such a political system that respects their ethnic and cultural identity. However, it is clearly untrue to say that the constitutional system of a state is always in harmony with national identity or local identities of its citizens. As a summary, I do not think that the EU, based on the principle of the absolute primacy of the EU law, gives member states sufficient opportunities to protect their national identities and local identities, especially since, according to Article 260, Treaty of the European Union, if they refuse to apply EU law, they expose themselves to legal liability, like it happens now with Poland. In my opinion, it should be in the EU law a clause stating that the Union respects both the national and constitutional identities of the member states, because only then, in principle, the problem of the EU respect for the identities of the member states will be finally resolved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eva. It's nothing to add. You know, it's clear. I'm happy, you know, here that basically the sources of that statements and this, analysis are coming back from 1962, 1964. It was the time when Schuman was basically shaping, the concept of the institutions, relations. So we feel, we see in that text the really Schuman finger. And, this is very, exciting when you read this text, exciting how this, the community of European nations can be, colorful, interesting, very challenging, and very, not uniform, This is something which basically everybody, all citizens from all countries are, I'm sure, expecting. So stay with us. And just now, I think it can be a kind of a reference or in the context of that what we had today until now. The speech of a Professor David Reichert. David, Professor of International Relations at the Comenius University in Bratislava. Professor David is an American. And in my quite long description of your speech, I just put two questions. And let me spell out the question first is what to do to stop the ideologies forcing to cancel tradition like Christmas, which are currently considered by the European Parliament and the European Commission. And the next, a kind of question. This is in line with implementing procedure for introducing the superstate. This was the statement, but the question is how Catholic leaders, bishops, and politicians should react and what should do as an action plan against it. So, Professor Reichert, thank you very much indeed. Again, you are assisting, this debates over the entire year, and you usually had a very excellent, statements and conclusions. And go ahead with that. Kind of a final, today debate. But we are going, this debate used to put a certain, a report in the future. Go ahead, David.
Yes. Can you hear me there?
Yes, excellent.
Okay, great. So I'm going to address this topic that I was given today, which you mentioned. Okay, so the question is, how can we stop this ideological and illegal tyranny of the European Union from proceeding with resolutions and laws that are totally out of its competency area? Now, the recent working document about Christmas of I think you're referring to the European Commissioner for Equality, it highlighted this question. Ironically, reportedly, her working document provides guidelines for replacing language for EU staff with so-called inclusive language. For example, replacing the word Christmas time, like have a happy Christmas time, with holiday time. So have a happy holiday time. And replacing phrases such as dear ladies and gentlemen with dear colleagues. Now, apparently, because of the media exposure of this working document and the protest over it, the Commissioner for Equality has now withdrawn the document. Okay, that's very positive. Okay. This crazy recommendation about the word Christmas time is not the real issue here. It's only a metaphor for the much larger problem in the European Union. And that is, from my perspective, the European Union extending its authority over areas of rights in which it has absolutely nothing to do, no authority, no competency to be involved. This includes, much more seriously, the June 2021 resolution of the European Parliament for all EU member states to liberalize their abortion laws. And if you remember, in September, this last September 2021, the resolution of the European Parliament about the recognition of same-sex partnerships in all member states. Now, that September resolution of the Parliament states that marriages or registered partnerships formed in one member state should be recognized in all of them. And it follows if you remember, the European Court of Justice ruling in the Coman versus Hamilton case, which found that spouse provisions in the free movement directive must also apply to same-sex couples. The European Commission is currently and unfortunately taking action against Romania, where the government there has not yet updated its laws to reflect the Court of Justice ruling in the Coman-Hamilton case. Now, as we have heard tonight, this is a very worrying legal and anti-democratic trend in the European Union. And it's a trend which we have been going through in my country, the United States of America also. It's fundamentally based on a flawed view of equality, a view that is divorced from its Judeo-Christian roots. It's a classic example of what you get when you separate the two, and when courts overstep their legal authority and pronounce non-legal policy decisions. Now, as an American, I can see precisely the same trend occurring in the United States of America. As you may know, the United States Constitution gives certain competencies to the national government in Washington, but it reserves the great majority of competencies to the 50 states. This includes issues of marriage, children, family, and health. However, incredibly, the national government in Washington, motivated by years and years of lobbying by secular progressive interests such as the American Civil Liberties Union, the Planned Parenthood Organization, and large corporations, the American government in Washington has fallen victim to this lobbying and this big money that's involved in the lobby. In the United States, these progressive interests have increasingly worked to violate the American Constitution, allowing the national government in Washington to overstep its legal competencies and authorities. The emblematic case, as you probably know, in the United States, it's centered around the legalization of abortion in all 50 states in a famous court case in 1973, okay? Completely out of the legal bounds of the national government. But they did it. Thereafter, there have been a string of U.S. Supreme Court cases advancing issues of health care, homosexual rights, and the legalization of same-sex marriage in 2015 for all the member states, completely illegally, against the U.S. Constitution. Now, please understand that I am not primarily making a moral argument here. I'm making a legal argument. There is absolutely nothing in the United States Constitution to allow the national government in Washington to exert legal authority in these areas of American social life. States and their residents have the legal right to decide these issues themselves, democratically, at the local level. So the question is, what can states do to protest this vast illegal extension of competency by central governments? Well, I would say first, in the American case, the states are doing it through legal litigation. Perhaps you are following the news recently in America. The states of Texas and Mississippi are legally challenging the national policy on abortion. And we hope that the US Supreme Court will finally come back to its senses and reverse its terrible illegal abortion decision of 1973. Well, what about the European Union? What can the member states do to halt the growing trend of illegal overreach by Brussels? Now, in some sense, it should be easier than it is for the states in the United States, because the European Union is a much less integrated situation. However, it's still not so simple. Many of the EU member states that have the greatest concern with the European Union overstepping its legal authority are also the same member states that benefit the most financially from being in the EU, especially in the areas of agriculture and regional funding. So the question is whether that these states, such as Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, should they just shut up and bow to the pressure of Brussels because of the money, the funding? Or should they risk the funding by taking a moral and legal stance against this illegal European Union overextension? As we know, Hungary and Poland are currently in this dilemma. And Poland, I suppose, from what I'm reading, is currently paying over 1 million euros per day in European Union penalties. So, unfortunately, the choice of action for these EU states appears extremely limited. Member states can protest and simply accept the financial penalties. Or they can leave the Union, do a Brexit like the United Kingdom. Of course, in my opinion, the best thing would be a great restructuring of the European Union and its institutions, as suggested this evening by Mr. Kleinwachter in his excellent talk. But perhaps there is a less radical way in the shorter term for EU member states to take action. And that is lobbying for the creation of a new treaty, a treaty that more clearly spells out the authorities and competencies of the European Union in these areas of controversy and forbids the European Union from overstepping these legal boundaries by 1 millimeter. Now, Poland and Hungary cannot force the European Commission to initiate a new treaty alone, but perhaps in a coalition of other like-minded EU member states, they can get eventually the Commission to initiate such a treaty, or minimally to initiate an extension of the Lisbon Treaty that will clarify these legal concerns. In fact, the United States could also use such a constitutional clarification. In addition to the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which forbids the national government in Washington from exerting authority in areas reserved to the states. So these are my thoughts this evening on this very interesting question. I would say in terms of the Catholic Church and the bishops across the European Union, the archdiocese and the diocese, I think the best would be, again, to lobby and to put pressure on the Commission to rethink, to open a new treaty proposal that will clarify once and for all some of these issues, these controversial issues in which the European Union has been overstepping its legal authority. So, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for the time tonight. And finally, in violation of the ideas of the European Commissioner for Equality, I wish you a merry and blessed Christmas time.
You too. Merry Christmas time. Yeah, blessed. Exactly. David, thank you, Professor David Reichert. Thank you very much indeed. You, supported different, this ideas, conclusion and considerations. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for your recommendations. Yeah, and we will not give up. The Christmas, is not going. Is not being to be, removed, as the Pope Francis said. Yes, the dictatorship, he just, named, the European Union as a European Commission as a dictatorship. This is very, first time, in fact. It seems to be that the Holy See, perceived that in a very common way, like we do, and now we just get some certain, a final short, speeches. Professor Grosse, are you with us? Just for 2 minutes for your 2 minutes conclusions. Referring to any topic you would like, to speak up. Professor Grosse, are you with us still? I see you online. So, Mr. Norbert Kleinwächter, if you would like, to just make some short comments on that, what was spoken. Yeah, Norbert, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Professor Kirschak. I was very impressed with the other speeches that were made, and I would like to simply shortly address the argument about the prevailing of the European law over national laws and national constitutions. And I think it is very relevant to our discussion today, because what we see and what we have seen in Germany is a serious conflict that was established politically between the European Union and the member states. For instance, we had actually a decision of our Bundesverfassungsgericht, which is the Federal Constitutional Court, which commented on a decision by the European Court of Justice concerning the common debt that was actually envisaged in one of the stability packages. And the European Court of Justice said that this is okay, and our Constitutional Court ruled that this is ultra vires, which means out of its normal competence for decision making. And the result was that the EU Commission filed an initiative about the breach of the law of the European treaties against Germany, and Chancellor Merkel, that was still in her office, replied that Germany would do its best to stick to the decision of the European Court of Justice. And in the very end, this procedure was actually ended because Germany claimed and proclaimed towards the European Union that it would actually stick to what had been decided on the EU level and basically ignored the decision of the Constitutional Court of Germany. And that actually means that we now, through the European Union and through the EU Commission, we have a conflict between even the judiciary and the executive powers, where basically an executive power in combination with the EU level even tries to ignore the judiciary branch, and actually one of the court decisions that were really fundamental. So there are attempts to circumvene national sovereignty through basically executive decision making, backed up by the European Judicial Court, which then tries to kind of knock out the constitutional courts on the national levels, whose main task is actually to preserve the national constitutions, right? And to make sure that there is no breach with the national constitution and with the national laws that have been decided democratically. So in addition to what I said before in my presentation, there needs not only to be a reform for or of the EU institutions on the executive side, we also need to look at the European Court of Justice, of course. because we cannot allow the European Court of Justice to make decisions that simply rule out national sovereignty. And that's what, and that was really brilliantly described in your presentation. That's what's happening more and more on the European level right now, and which leads, of course, to a split up between the EU and the member states. And I was also rapporteur on the Brexit, so I was responsible for kind of dealing with the EU Great Britain treaties. And also the political decisions that our English friends had made to leave the European Union. And basically their concerns were exactly there. Their concerns were that slowly but certainly their national sovereignty and their national decisions would be ruled out by the EU court or by the EU Commission, and they will basically be forced to accept, ideas that they do not share about migration, about cultural decisions, about weird definitions on equality. And now I'm with the speaker who's just spoken before me. It is indeed also a cultural war that they're waging, and they're waging it internationally. And that fits very well my argument, which I mentioned before, that it's not only a German problem. Unfortunately for Germany to say, and I am German, it is largely a German problem, but it's an international issue because the woke movement that exists really tries to redefine what equality, what fairness, and ultimately what democracy means. And that new definition of democracy and of equality actually leads to something that we know from traditional socialist ideas, where you had Räte, where you had councils, which were full of quotas and of regulations that had to be met, and where basically, company councils could send members to the major council, but always replace the member. And it's very similar what we're seeing today with quotas on women, with quotas on migrants, with quotas on ethnical backgrounds, which we see very clearly in the U.S. When we talk about affirmative action. By the way, something that's to be established in the EU more and more as well, and which the new German government, formed by the socialists, the Greens, and the Liberals, is going to introduce as well. So you draw your attention away from results, from performance, from qualification, to quotas, to something that fits the thought of that particular group of the woke movement, and this kind of thinking is taking over in the European Union, and it's dangerous because it is fundamentally directed against our Judeo-Christian values, which are basically founded on an understanding of a belief in the Bible and belief in God, which is also absent in many of these thoughts, by the way, and which is fundamentally based in order, in a fixed order, and originally a God-given, but now, of course, a national structure. And it is this process of destructuralization, of deconstructivism, as they call it themselves, that is actually a great danger to our systems in Europe that have worked very well and that have kept our societies together, and that have also been able, when we look at the European community, that have worked initially to bring our nations closer together. And I personally think it is very sad that, with the attempt of the left political movements to redefine what democracy means, to redefine what equality means, to redefine what chances mean, and that, our common achievements that we've made are put in danger. And that's going to be a danger for our welfare of our people and for the stability of our institutions as a whole. And we do not benefit from what is happening here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norbert. And Eva Salkiewicz, Doctor, respond. Yeah, go ahead with your response, please. Dr. Eva Salkiewicz, are you there? I see you still with us, right? Could you just short respond, please?
Yes.
Yeah.
I listened very carefully the presentation of Professor Norbert Kleinwachter, and because we don't know each other yet, but we think we were pointing out the same issues and maybe agree about it. So I wrote you a simple note about our future cooperation. Why? Because it would be interested to prepare, which would be very easy, like a comparison study of the decisions of the German Constitutional Court and Polish Constitutional Court in situation where the supremacy of the EU law was confronted with the nation of sovereignty, isn't it? And since I suppose what I have seen from our part and also of the decisions from the past of the German court, they were almost the same stand, the same issue. So it would be interesting to show this for the people who are against, saying that we are against the supremacy of Germany, that Germany is against something. And we should say that, in fact, from the legal point of view, there is no difference of opinion between us, because simply it is illegal. It is not founded in the treaties, independently from which political party you are, or, for example, I'm in any party, but as legal people, as professors or teachers, etc., we know how it works. And of course, the jurisprudence of our national constitutional courts proves it, isn't it? So that's what I have to say.
Okay, thank you very much. And just 1 minute, Professor David Reichert, for your response, please.
Yes, thank you very much once again. And I was just listening with great interest to the comments. I agree with everything my colleagues have said. I think very prescient and very well spoken. I would only maybe ask, we talked about you asked me about the bishops, and I didn't speak too much about the Catholic bishops, but I would really like to, maybe for us in the future, to investigate the commission of the Bishops' Conference of the European Union. And what are these guys doing? And I have read a number of things about the commission of the Bishops' Conference of the European Union. And I believe that it may have more of a liberal progressive bent to it, which may not make it very effective. So I think perhaps we could think about that in future discussions, and how this commission of the Bishops' Conference to the European Union can be a better instrument of the Church to lobby Brussels, the institutions, for policies that are not only more in a legal sense, but in an ethical, moral sense, in the Judeo-Christian tradition. So that would be my final comment. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I would like to announce, we are waiting up to the beginning of January for some kind of a papers in written form. They are not going to be scientific, but of course very, short and logic, and with recommendations. I think we can basically put that together in some certain report. Why in January? Because, according to the basically agenda of the Conference for Future of Europe, this finish is going to be finished at the February. And we would like, to have our kind of written recommendations to be ready to be distributed. And we, of course, start to work very hard in January to put that together, to make some logic to, and I am, of course, inviting now already all of you, and then afterwards trying to, put a certain interesting stuff in that report. We will, cooperate together. But of course, the first initial material, some, chapters for that we would like to have, on the beginning of January. For instance, that what you read out, Dr. Eva Salkiewicz, it can be inserted, but who was the author of that? Microphone, please. Microphone. Michael, could you switch a microphone, please?
Yes. My presentation, as I said, it was not mine completely, but it was based, and I will send you all information, of course, in Polish or in English. This was based on the presentation during the conference 10 years ago, 2010, of Professor Lech Morawski.
The reason I am asking, just the author rights to reprint or things like that, we need to make sure that we are not in the contradiction to the author's right. But this is just, some certain...
No, because this is about citing the judgments of the court, so everyone can quote, because this is normal.
Okay, I understand. So thank you very much indeed. So at this point, we approach...
Sorry, I have one question about what Professor Reicher said about the Komecze. I think he was saying about this commission, yes, at the EU, that they should cooperate. So I think the most qualified persons for it would be Professor Mazurkiewicz, who probably is not with us anymore, because he was there, the chairman of this commission.
Yes, we know how to find the way. We know the people who were basically in that connection. So thank you, David. You raised that issue, and we like Professor Mazurkiewicz to invite to that report as well, and try to find out how this commission can be of the value added. So at this point, once again, as David challenged us. I wish all of you Merry Christmas and blessed Merry Christmas, and thank you very much for that. I think, because of you, excellent, debate. This debate, as I said, is broadcasted to, I assume, probably 50,000 or even more, viewers in the internet. And this was organized by Institute of Schuman Thought and the Ordo Iuris. And, I assume, of course, we can talk about that, assume that we will not finish this kind of a debates. We need probably rearrange this. And I would like, we can, organize together with some people, organization from, David Reichert's side, from the Honorary side, MCC, and many organizations to try to build at this forum in next year, kind of a coalition, okay? So that, keep up with that, basically fast, run, a speed, and keep these ideas in the mind, and just try to process them. So thank you very much indeed, and again, blessed Merry Christmas, and extend this blessed Merry Christmas to all your acquaintance, all your colleagues, colleagues. It reminds me, this what the European Parliament wanted to say. All your wives, all your children, everybody which you are in the contact. So thank you very much indeed, and see you. Be in touch. Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.